Welcome everyone. I see it's just about 4 p.m. We're welcoming everyone into the webinar today on synagogue safety and security around the high holidays. My name is Nitin Kochavi, and I am the Director of Synagogue Strategy for UJA. I want to welcome to today's webinar the synagogues joining us from the New York City area, Westchester and Long Island, as well as to extend a special welcome to the Rockland area organizations joining us. The security of our Jewish institutions and our Jewish professional leaders, volunteers, and members is of critical importance for us at UJA, and we know for all of you as well. We want to thank you for joining us who are committed to the united purpose of keeping our people and institutions safe. I also want to thank Dr. Cheryl Fishbein, the chair of JCRC, and the Community Security Initiative team led by Mitchell Silver, whose mission is to provide the support and resources that are critical in these efforts. And David Pollack, Associate Executive Director and Director of Public Policy and Security at JCRC, for all his efforts in this area. While what we will be shared today is relevant for most, we acknowledge that each institution has its own security needs and concerns, and everyone is encouraged to reach out to Mitch and his team, the Community Security Service, CSI, and our other security partners and providers at any time. Also, just to remember, for those who require a loan to help finance upgrades to your security infrastructure, do not hesitate to be in touch with Hebrew Free Loan Society, and we'll share that information as well. And with now, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Cheryl Fishbein, and I'm honored to be the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, also known as JCRC New York. A little more than 2.5 years ago, JCRC partnered with UJA Federation to establish the Community Security Initiative. In the shadow of Pittsburgh and Poway, Jersey City, and Muncie, it was clear that threats against Jewish communal organizations and Jews on the streets were increasing. In response, with support from generous donors and our partners at UJA Federation, the Community Security Initiative grew from 1 person to 17 security and intelligence professionals working every day with our partners in law enforcement and homeland security to protect our community and beyond. Our exceptional team works and covers many fields: physical security, cybersecurity, training, purchasing support, and intelligence gathering. For example, our intelligence analysts scour the deep and dark webs looking for people who might cause harm to Jews and to our institution. Supporting institutions throughout New York City, Long Island, Westchester, and now Rockland, our team delivers detailed professional security assessments to synagogues, schools, and other institutions. And many of them use these documents to apply for federal and New York State security grants. Our effectiveness can be measured by New York's results. At the outset of the CSI initiative in 2020, at-risk New York nonprofits received 186 security grants, totaling over $17 million. This year, 310 at-risk not-for-profits will receive over $46 million. That is 270% more than in 2020. We are proud that these totals include dozens of Jewish organizations in Rockland County, which is our newest region of our CSI initiative. Today, you will hear from our team and learn about our intelligence assessment as well as best practices. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions or concerns, even after this Zoom. We will be there to assist you and help you in every way that we can. And most importantly, we wish you a Shana Tova U'Mituka, and may you be inscribed for good and a sweet year, and may you all be safe during the year to come. Thank you for joining us.
I'm Mitch Silber, the Executive Director for the Community Security Initiative. And as you've heard from both Nadine and Cheryl, this briefing is a little bit different than in years past because we're excited to be able to welcome Rockland institutions, not only to the briefing, but to the CSI family. On behalf of Ari Rosenblum, the CEO of the Rockland Federation, I wanted to wish a warm welcome to any Rockland institutions who are participating today. And I'm sure you've heard the news that along with partnering with CSI, Rockland Federation now has its own regional security director, Ethan Ehrlich. So just wanted to, if you haven't met Ethan yet, just you can see him now on Zoom and hopefully meet with him soon in person for an assessment, a visit, a walkthrough. He's there to provide all of the same services that our regional security managers here in CSI do, but just for Rockland, and he's tied in with our team and everything else that we do. All right, so on to today's program. For today's program, we're going to have really three parts. The first is a threat briefing from the CSI's threat intelligence analyst, Rebecca Fetterman. Then we're going to turn to one of our close partner organizations, the Community Security Service, CSS. And Richard Priem, who is the COO and Deputy National Director, will talk about suspicious activity and what it is you need to be on the lookout for. And then last but not least, I'll be providing a presentation on everyday security procedures that our team at CSI has put together from the best practices of both Israeli and American security professionals. And then at the end, we'll have some Q&A. So thanks again for joining us this afternoon. And with that, let me turn things over to Rebecca Fetterman, the Threat Intelligence Analyst for CSI.
Thank you, Mitch. I'm just going to share my screen. If for some reason you can't see it, please let me know. Can everyone see? I'll assume yes. Okay, great. So I'm here to talk about the current threat environment that we nationally, but specifically as New Yorkers, find ourselves in. So it is not surprising that the last 2 years have really seen a significant proliferation of hate incidents, both nationwide and here in New York State. The first quote that you're seeing on your screen comes from the Department of Homeland Security in July of 2022, just a month and a half ago, indicating that the most significant terrorist threat that we currently face in the United States is from lone offenders and small groups of individuals who commit acts of violence because they are motivated in part by their religious, ideological beliefs and grievances. And against this backdrop, in June, the DHS also indicated that faith-based institutions and religious minorities are among likely targets for such violent extremists. And unfortunately, just to highlight how prescient that point is, the shooter who carried out his deadly attack on the top supermarket in Buffalo, while in that instance, Jews were not the target, his manifesto dedicated 29 pages to anti-Semitic imagery, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and his conclusion that, quote, "The Jews are the biggest problem the Western world has ever had. They must be called out and killed." So who are the actors in this threat environment that I'm speaking about? There really is, unfortunately, a wide array of groups, both those who are officially organized and those who are loosely organized around an ideology, who ultimately view the Jewish community and Jewish institutions as legitimate targets. Al-Qaeda, as an example, the individual who took synagogue members hostage in Colleyville, Texas, he came because he was calling for the release of a convicted Al-Qaeda supporter. And in the wake of this hostage situation, Al-Qaeda publications lauded him as a hero. We have ISIS, whose propaganda materials, almost every single time they're issued, call for the killing of Jews. We have Hezbollah, who over the last few years have been caught and arrested doing reconnaissance missions in New York City and other locations. And of course, you have Iran, whose Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps actually just recently in July shared a video on their social media that declared that Iran will quickly develop nuclear weapons if the United States or the Zionist regime make any stupid mistakes, and that their ballistic missiles will quote, turn New York into hellish ruins. And then the four pictures that you can see on the right, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, anti-Zionist extremists, and anti-Semites, all these pictures are actually taken from New York that I've located in my research. And you have white supremacist groups, neo-Nazi groups who are actively recruiting. You have anti-Semites who are distributing propaganda. Recently in Long Island, people woke up to horribly anti-Semitic flyers on their driveways or their lawns. And you have anti-Zionist extremists who have held protests on almost a weekly basis in New York City. And we've witnessed them praising Hamas, calling to globalize the Intifada, and even engaging in violence. So the data really speaks for itself. Across the country, we've seen a rise in anti-Semitic incidents. ADL conducts their annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. And in 2021, the most recent data we have on hand, there were over 2,700 incidents throughout the United States, which is a 34% increase from the incidents that were tabulated in 2020. And it's the highest number on record since the ADL began recording these incidents in 1979. All of the states in yellow on this map represent locations in which over 40 incidents took place. And across the whole country, New York had the largest number of incidents with 416. Again, let's drill down into New York because that's why we're here. Incidents rose between 2020 and 2021, 24%. Again, in 2021, the most recent data we have on hand, 416 anti-Semitic incidents, 161 incidents involved a swastika, and 51 incidents involved assault, which is the most ADL has ever recorded in New York State. Now let's look at institutions. Again, why we're all here. In 2021, there were 62 anti-Semitic incidents recorded at Jewish institutions, synagogues, JCCs, schools, and this represented a 41% increase from that which happened in 2020. Now, while this number may have been in part due to COVID closures in 2020, it still underscores the need to take security at your institutions very seriously, which is why CSI and our colleagues are here to help. So what does this look like recently? So if you look at this map, this is from the NYPD's hate crimes dashboard. Over the last 2.5 years, there have been 466 incidents targeting the Jewish community. And as you can see in the word cloud on the right, Jews are by far the most targeted group over and over and over again. And if we're drilling down to the most recent data that NYPD has publicly available, from January through June 2022, Jews continued to be the most targeted group, 44% of the hate crimes committed against the Jewish community. And there's from January to June, there were 141 anti-Semitic hate crimes. And in the same period in 2021, 106. And the data is underscored again in July of 2022 and again in August of 2022. August, we can take a look. This data was just released last week. And as you can see, hate crimes against the Jewish community have increased year to date from last August, 118%, which is alarming. But while this outlook may seem bleak, we are incredibly, incredibly fortunate as a community to have a myriad of resources that we've dedicated to keeping all of us safe. So to talk more about that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mitch so that you can hear from him and our dedicated colleagues at partner organizations how to best keep your institutions safe and secure during the upcoming holiday season and beyond.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. That was really helpful. And now actually we're going to turn to Richard Priam from the Community Security Service, who's going to talk to you about suspicious activities and what one needs to be on the lookout for.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you, CSI, for having us here today. I'll be talking about detecting suspicious activity and why it matters. And it will weave in well with the things that we just heard from Rebecca. For those of you who don't know me or the CSS, a few things about the Community Security Service. We are a nonprofit founded in 2007 by members of the community with backgrounds in security. Our mission is to protect Jewish life and the Jewish way of life. And we do that by following a volunteer security model that has been used around the world for decades. We have a formal partnership with CSI, the ADL, and of course also the Secure Community Network and many other organizations in the New York area. To date, we have trained over 6,000 volunteers, and we maintain active security teams made up of volunteers at over 125 institutions in over a dozen states. And I think we learned from Rebecca just now that we're facing some serious threats, the highest numbers ever recorded by ADL. Scary stats even from this month in New York. But I want to zoom in on a few big incidents that we probably all heard about over the last few years, because there's some lessons there that are relevant for the topic I'm discussing with you. First, the attack in Pittsburgh in 2018, where 11 people were killed at the Tree of Life synagogue. Second, the attack on the Chabad of Poway, where a gunman entered and killed a community member and wounded multiple others. And third, the hostage situation at the Beth Israel in Colleyville earlier this year. And I'm highlighting these attacks because when it comes to these serious targeted attacks on our institutions, they almost always have two things in common. And the first is obvious, that's they're motivated by anti-Semitism. I don't think we need to go into that. But the second thing that these attacks have in common, and it's a little bit less obvious, but very important, is that in almost all cases of attacks on Jewish targets, the perpetrators spend significant time planning for their attack and conducting research, surveillance, and reconnaissance of their target. And this is what that looks like. Most of you have probably heard about these attacks, and I'm sure you also learned about all the stories that came in the press about the perpetrator, the victims. But what you may not have heard is the many hours, days, and in some cases weeks, the perpetrators were gathering information and conducting surveillance of their target. And there's a whole lot of information about our institutions that can be gathered online. And that's, there are things that you can do about it. And I know that CSI has some really good training and best practices on how to keep your information that's available online secure. But just a few examples, they can find your institution online. That's what the attacker in Colleyville did. He searched for synagogues in the area. They can follow you on social media. And if you post information about events, starting times, locations, they can use that. They can look at your website to gather information on your membership, maybe even live stream services, unless you've taken some measures and, for example, created a password protected membership page. And they can even look on Street View of Google Maps to get a basic sense of your institution's layout. As I mentioned, there are things you can do about this, but I'm going to leave that and not address it right now, but focus on the second thing that comes with these kind of preparations, because ultimately there's only so much information that you can find out online. And what attackers or potential attackers will want to do is gather information at the selected target itself through surveillance. And they're seeking out information such as what is the parking situation? Where could they park? Are there cars or things parked in front of the building that might complicate their planning? What is the traffic situation? Are there employees and how do the employees behave? Do they, if they're security guards, do they check people coming in and out? Are they doing patrols? Are they proactive? Are they sitting on their phone with AirPods in? What are the types of services? How are people dressed when they come to services? How would they be able to blend in? Anything in the neighborhood, cafes or construction or anything that they should take into account? What are the routines? They need to know when people arrive and leave, and what routes people arriving and leaving use, but also for them, if they intend to escape, how are they going to get out of there? And what are the kind of security routines? Is there somebody that checks? Is there somebody asking questions of people coming in? Any kind of problematic factors that might influence the type of method and the type of attack, and maybe the type of target that they would want to choose as part of their preparation. So this is something that almost always happens, and I'm going to give you some real examples that you probably did not hear about, because the perpetrators got caught in the act before they could perpetrate their attack. First, a few weeks ago, details came out about a former Marine who was arrested in 2018 but it only came out a few weeks ago, the details from the court case. But he planned a number of horrific things, including attacking a synagogue on Long Island. And CSI and ADL, they've released a lot of information about this, the perpetrator and ideology behind it. But if you look at the court proceedings, it showed that this person, together with some of his fellow neo-Nazis, was conducting dry run exercises behind the synagogue, and that he had come multiple times to document the different security systems at the building. And if you look on the right of the screen, you have someone who was sentenced to prison for 20 years because he planned to bomb a Reformed temple in Colorado. And he had visited the location many times. He was being followed by an undercover FBI agent who pretended to be in with him on this plan. And he was sharing with this person surveillance footage, video footage of multiple locations, people walking in and out of the synagogue. He had documented with his camera the different kind of cameras that were active in the building. And all of that was done prior to the point where he was ready to purchase explosives, which is when the FBI stepped in and made the arrest. So if you didn't hear about these cases, which you probably haven't, that's good. And it links very well with what we do at CSS, and the kind of best practice I'm going to show you next is the kind of preventative measures that you can take as community members to create a deterrence, to make our institutions less of an easy target, and to detect and report suspicious activity before they can materialize into a real threat. And I just want to walk you through a few best practices. So if you're going to services or it is you're responsible for your synagogue, or even if it's an outdoor services taking place, if there's anyone that you see lingering around for long periods of time, or walking by multiple times, showing an interest in the facility, someone videotaping, sketching, or taking notes on the facility or its security personnel, someone entering unauthorized areas or tamper with the security equipment that is there, someone asking weird questions to you, some of your colleagues, or even visitors about security or about anything that makes them wonder, why is someone asking me these kind of questions? Or someone that tries to come in, and when you very basic, simply ask the person why they are there, cannot come up with a story that makes sense to you. And similarly with vehicles, if they're driving at unusual speeds and the occupants are taking interest in the facility, driving around multiple times, when something seems out of place about the vehicle, it doesn't make sense for them to be there, or it is parked somewhere around the corner and someone is sitting in there looking at the facility or taking interest in the people walking to the facility, but there's no logical explanation for this person being there. And of course, if anything is parked or left behind very close to the building that seems suspicious, these are things that you want to be on the lookout for. I just want to underscore that we also do in our training for our volunteers that we're not looking at someone's background, religious orientation, or gender. You're looking at behaviors, and those are completely independent from any of these kind of biases, and we don't want you to start thinking that that those are things that we're on the lookout for. So what do? If you see any of these things and you don't, if you have a security team, mention it to them. If you have a CSS team of volunteers, mention it to the CSS team leader on shift. And obviously, anytime you feel threatened, call law enforcement. And of course, you can always report it to CSI, to Mitch and Rebecca and the team, so they can put the dots together. If the same person is spotted at multiple locations, they know that this is something that they need to elevate. If you want to learn more about CSS and how we train volunteers, there's two programs. Entry Point is our introductory program into volunteer security. It's 1 hour. It's for the entire congregation. We customize it for your institution. If you're interested, you can go on our website and register. Everything we offer, all our training, our programs are free of cost. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. And if you've done the entry point, or you already know that you want to do a team of volunteers at your synagogue, our CSS synagogue program is established to help you form that team of volunteers with members of your community who understand the nuances, who can keep that inclusivity and openness that is so important, but at the same time, pay attention and do access control, do parameter control, and amplify any existing security measures that you have in place. So Thank you again for listening. Thank you, CSI, Mitch, Rebecca, for having me on, and I'll stay on in case there are any questions later on.
Thanks so much, Richard. And I see there have been some questions in the chat already about what will be available afterward. We'll have a recording of this presentation today available, and also at least both CSI decks. I'll have to talk with Richard if his deck can be available. There is some more sensitive information in that. With that, we're going to turn to the third part of our presentation today, and that's going to be focused on everyday security procedures and best practices. So, you may be asking, why are we focusing on everyday security procedures and practices if we're preparing for the high holidays? Well, really, these practices, these issues, these habits are good every day, but they're really, come into focus on the high holidays, and we want to build these good habits. So, we can talk about some of the different categories that we'll be discussing today, both the vulnerabilities of a facility, what should your procedures be to open, close, and during the day, identifying suspicious behavior, a little bit along the lines of what Richard talked about, security searches, what should be involved in your screening process, both for people and mail and deliveries, how do you handle anonymous messages and threats, and what should your security plan be during day-to-day operations? Because all of these can help you prepare for an attack. So we like to think about threats and vulnerabilities, and they're really two different topics. Threats are the things that are coming at us, whether they're targeted violence, vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, someone who wants to start a fire, suspicious persons, or those with mental health issues. Those are all threats that can come at us. Vulnerabilities are really ways that those threats can manifest themselves and break through sort of our security perimeter, our protections. So, unrestricted access to religious services or to the perimeter, leaving your facility without having any vehicle access controls, loss of control of visitors, windows and doors that can be compromised, and the absence of procedures or policies relating to building security. And then there's human error. Unfortunately, we saw this in Uvalde with the school shooting where that door was propped open. So as an institution, what should you be thinking about? Opening, closing, midday security procedures? Well, here are some of the best practices. When those people who are usually the first to arrive, they should have almost a checklist of activities that they do. And these are some of the items that should be on that checklist. Looking at the perimeter, making sure that any of the secondary doors aren't open, seeing if there are suspicious people around the institution, potentially doing surveillance on you. And then once you enter, was the alarm on overnight? It's great to have cameras, but if nobody checks them, they're not that useful. So someone should check the activity for overnight. And as I mentioned, there should be that checklist. What about during the day, when you're functioning, when you're operational? And in some ways, this is more challenging because, it's an ongoing process while people are constantly exiting and entering the building. Once again, who's watching you? To some of the points that Richard made, this idea of sort of counter surveillance and situational awareness. Is someone across the street with a video camera or a phone taking pictures of your entrance? Is there a car loitering there that looks suspicious? These are things that you want to report. If you've got cameras, again, they do need to be monitored during the day. What about the doors? We've heard these awful stories about people leaving a door left ajar for a smoke break or a lunch break. And it's really something that senior management at institutions have to crack down upon and also check to make sure that employees aren't doing that, because it's the easiest way to get in and out, but it's a liability for your institution. And when you do see something you're concerned about, report it. Nobody ever got in trouble for reporting something they thought was suspicious and turned out to not necessarily be that threatening, but you don't want to be the person who hesitated and lo and behold, that ended up turning into a real threat. And we ask our institutions to develop a security culture. It starts at the top, senior management, it works its way all the way through. And then what about during the day? It's great to have security guards, but we found that some institutions don't realize you need to give them guidance. It's called post orders. Where do you want them to stand? When do you want them to stand there? Do you want them to patrol certain areas of your building? Do you want them to do a perimeter check once, twice a day? Those are important issues. What about when they go on break? Who's covering from them? You've heard about from CSS and volunteers and paid guards. We think a mix of both is an ideal situation. But sometimes institutions can't pay for paid guards. So we think volunteers, are a tremendous resource to tap. And does everyone know the security plan? This is sort of like a concert where everyone has to be reading off the same sheet of music. So if that incident occurs, bomb threat, active shooter, fire, everybody knows where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do. And then there's closing. Again, oftentimes institutions have, the same people who are the last out. And they should have the assignment of making sure that all of the ways to access your institution are closed, windows and doors. Make sure that they are the last person out. Turn on the camera system, arm the alarm, and make sure, again, that there's no one doing any surveillance on you. And these are all best practices. So what about suspicious behavior? Who in the organization, if anyone, is tasked with reporting that to the police? Or is that the responsibility of everyone? We think it's worthwhile to have someone in the institution identified as the person to report something that's not necessarily at the level of 911, but still needs to be reported to the police. And that requires some type of structure within your organization so that everybody knows, hey, it's Dave or Lisa or Tom, and that's the person who will report that suspicious incident to local law enforcement. What about internal communications? If there is an incident, how will you communicate with the Early Childhood Center? How will you communicate, with other parts of your institution, downstairs in the ballroom, in the sanctuary? And then bottom line, if you think that the issue is threatening enough that 911 needs to be called, everyone is empowered to call 911. That doesn't need any specific designation. Everyone is empowered to call 911. What is suspicious behavior? It's really anything out of the norm. And, from the counterterrorism world, we had heard about the issue of looking for people with long winter coats in the summer. They might be potentially some type of bomber. Someone who tries to enter your building multiple times. That's, again, you may want to report that person. We talked about the person taking photos of people coming in and out, loitering of vehicles of people, and feel free to have your security guards ask questions before people enter. They don't necessarily need to be at the level of Al. We don't have to ask them what their Torah portion was for their bar bat mitzvah, but questions that are specific to your institution that only someone who has benign intentions would be able to answer. And then last but not least, make sure that you're vigilant, making sure that people aren't leaving things outside your door, packages or objects. So now we get to screening for people and deliveries. And this is really important because, one of the lessons from Colleyville was that access control was vital. Now that happens to be for visiting guests, and we'll get to that in a moment. But, when we're talking about people, both it's new members to your congregation, what is the protocol for allowing them to be a member? And then there's employees, both onboarding and offboarding. We'll talk about that in a moment. How do you screen people during services that we know? The high holidays tend to be the busiest days of the year, where you're going to have people who don't normally show up for services. And last but not least, mail and deliveries. So what about new members? Is there some type of process that you have when someone wants to join your congregation? We realize that after 2.5 years of COVID, the last thing you want to do is create too many hurdles to have someone join, but you do need to have some procedures. Does someone have to make a referral for them? Do they just walk in, or do they have to call ahead and make an appointment to meet with the membership director? Is there a form they have to fill out? For a new member, you probably don't necessarily need a background check, but if you are suspicious, we have had some synagogues do that. And then also, where do you meet with them for that appointment? Do you meet with them inside your facility or outside? So just something to keep in mind as you deal with new members. Then there's employees, and obviously with employees, there should be a higher threshold, both for onboarding and offboarding. So we do recommend background checks and potentially a drug screening for employees. They do need to be trained on security because everybody has a role, especially emergency procedures, and that orientation should be formalized. Maybe it's an online system that you use, or it's something that they go through on a monthly basis. And then if you're giving them key fobs or keys, someone needs to record that. And when someone leaves your organization, you want those devices returned. They have to sign them back. And you do need to have a process in case keys are lost. It happens. If someone is leaving your organization, obviously we want to shut down their computer access. And last but not least, sometimes if you're terminating an employee under difficult circumstances, that might be the beginning of them becoming a threat. So something to keep in mind. We talked a little bit, alluded to screening for services and gatherings. And our mantra at CSI is that really to put people into 3 different buckets. We call them the known known, the known unknowns, and the unknowns. Right. So the knowns, these are the regulars. They're there at your congregation, for services, for Mincha, for Marav, for Shachrit. They're regulars, and now they're here for the holidays. They're sort of in the Disney fast pass lane. You can let them in. Then they're known unknowns. You don't know these people, but potentially they've registered in advance for services, and there's a list that you can check them off, or maybe they have a ticket. And then there are the unknowns. Again, back to Colleyville, someone who shows up your door, says they want to attend services, and something on the hair on the back of someone's neck is raised because they're concerned about it. And that's when you may want to ask them some questions. And that we haven't put it here, but we recommend you look at the Department of Homeland Security. CISA has put together a program called the Power of Hello. And it's a way of speaking to people without being confrontational and trying to engage with them in order to really vet out if you should be concerned about them and help you make that decision as to whether you should let them in or not. And, at the end of the day, we're trying to strike this balance, security as well as a welcoming attitude. And that's, the nature of being a house of worship. On to another topic, anonymous calls, emails, and threats. Unfortunately, over the last 2+ years, we've seen this happen, both JCCs and synagogues. And these are some of the issues to consider. Who's the person who gets that message? Is it the person at your front desk? Who's going to review it? Do you call 911? If it's some type of bomb threat, should you conduct a security search? Should you evacuate? And then communication announcements. How do you communicate both internally to staff as well as to membership? So when we talk about packages, we recommend that you actually take this slide and print it and put it in your mailroom, because this really is a pretty fulsome guide in terms of what to do if you've got a package that for some reason or another, looks suspicious to the people in the mailroom. And there needs to be a policy in place. Fortunately, this hasn't been an issue over the last few years where suspicious packages turned out to be really threatening, but it's something that we have to keep in mind because this is something that seems to really never go away. So when we send you these slides, this is one that we recommend: print it, put it in the mailroom. What about bomb threats? Unfortunately, they've become all too common. A lot of JCCs have gotten them. We've dealt with them over the last couple of years. Many of them are theater, They're not real, thankfully, but they trigger a whole process, and maybe someone is watching. They're certainly harassing to the institution. Some of these JCCs have to shut down during the day, disruptive. If you don't have your members able to attend your institution, they're costly. And again, thankfully, only a fraction of them have involved a real device. So, what should you do? Well, really, the number one thing you need to do is notify law enforcement if there's a bomb threat. Don't try and make too many decisions on your own. That's the first thing you need to do. Hopefully, you've already written up some type of bomb threat plan that the staff knows and that you've trained to. If not, please reach out to your CSI regional security manager. We can help you prepare that. When we look at bomb threats, we can categorize them as high, medium, and low. And this is a general guide. A low risk lacks realism, potentially poses a minimum risk. The threat is vague. It doesn't seem like they particularly know your institution, or maybe it's implausible, or it's someone who's sort of a repeat offender. Medium threat, it sounds a little bit more serious. Something that they're saying gives you some insight that maybe they do know your institution. Maybe they're talking about particular times or places where that device may be. So that's, this individual may even indicate, hey, I'm serious. I really mean this. And last but not least, high, more detail to the threat. The individual may even be able to or willing to provide their identity or the organization that they represent. And it suggests that they have taken steps to prepare for this. So what should you do? I think most people think, oh, evacuate immediately. However, that's really not always the correct decision. Of course, police or building management, can make that decision. But, from our perspective, we're concerned that it may be a ploy to get all of your employees outside where there may be an active shooter. So really, unless police or building management order it, it has to be a credible threat. It really has to be in that high category, or you actually find a device. There might be other different ways to handle it. There are different ways to handle it if it doesn't meet this criteria. And then when you search for when there's a device on the premises, who should search for it? I think, most people's perception would be that, oh, well, shouldn't it be the trained police officers? Well, actually, our recommendation is that it's the building staff, because no one knows your building better than you do. And you know what's normal. You know what the baseline is. You know what might be out of place. Maybe they might tag along, but building staff lead the way. And as we come to the end, we talk about emergency communications. Do you have a protocol in place? Who is it that'll reach out to law enforcement if there is an emergency or a non-emergency? And as we talked about earlier, everyone has the ability, should be empowered, and very cognizant to call 911 if they really believe it's a true emergency. These are some of the different modalities that people can use. Text and email with some of these apps like Rave and other, Bond, visual paging. If you've got a PA system, voice over IP, fire alarm. We know some Orthodox synagogues are experimenting with sort of electronic billboards that are set to broadcast a message that's coming from someone who's authorized to put that out there. And then obviously, what are your internal systems? PA, walkie-talkie, text, because we may be in a life-threatening situation, you do have the ability to use these technologies and to violate the Yom Tov. So last but not least, here are the highlights to take away from today's briefing. Make sure you've got some type of security personnel at your facility for the high holidays. Ideally, you've got armed people outside, screeners, at your place of entry inside, and be prepared for increased attendance. Volunteers, if you can connect with CSS, they're a tremendous organization. Their volunteers are top-notch and get phenomenal training and are a real asset and force multiplier for your congregation. And they know it's normal at your synagogue as opposed to the paid guard. Make a security plan with the idea in mind that you are going to have a large number of people and children here, and that might be different, probably is different from your normal morning services. Emergency plans. Two issues to focus on in particular are active shooter and fire, because those can be the most deadly. Make sure your local law enforcement knows what your plan is. Make sure they're on board with that. And then, the emails, a lot of institutions have a general email, but the question is, how often is that checked? We've seen a lot of these anonymous bomb threats come to emails in the middle of the night, and no one checks that email in the morning. It could be 24 hours later before they realize there was a bomb threat. Thankfully, it wasn't real, but if it hadn't been real, they never knew. So if you've got that general email, someone has to check that daily. COVID preparation, listen, we leave that to you. Institutions are making decisions consistent with what their congregations, expect. But certainly online electronic forms is one way we've seen it if you do require vaccination. We talked about having a communication plan and the multiple modalities. And last but not least, test the equipment. It's great to have all these things, camera, fire alarm, panic buttons, but make sure they're tested before we get to the Chagim. So with that, I'm going to stop there, and we are going to move to Q&A. So if you've got some questions, please put those in the chat, and we will try and handle them all.
One question that popped
Yeah.
up. The best use of cameras. What do cameras tell us? Signs to look for, etc.
Look, cameras in many ways have their greatest utility after the fact. Something happens, I think back to when we had this individual, this vandal throwing rocks and bricks at a variety of different Jewish institutions up in Riverdale, and those CCTV cameras at a variety of different institutions helped us identify the individual. CSS was able to harvest that material, pass it to NYPD, and that led to the arrest. So, the cameras after the fact have a lot of utility, but they do have some deterrence in the sense that if someone is thinking about, putting graffiti on your building and they see that you've got robust cameras outside, that may motivate them to potentially go somewhere else. David Pollack.
Cameras are also can have analytics in them, and that's the new wave. And those of you who get security grants, they should talk to their regional security manager, and find out how they can use analytics. Analytics can tell you if someone is in a wing of a building that shouldn't be, or they can use, they can identify that the rabbi belongs in the sanctuary, at a particular time. But, if someone else has entered the sanctuary, they can send a text message to you. So, one of the things, if people are parking or acting close to your building, they can send a text message. So that's, even though people don't necessarily view their cameras every night, the cameras can tell you that some unusual occurrence happened. If there's something that's been an object that's been left for X minutes in an area that shouldn't be, if someone's near your garbage, you can create analytics that solve all those issues and notify you.
Thank you, David. I think the next question would kind of be for Richard. Do you provide security for the high holy days? If a shul wants security training, do you provide one?
So thanks, Seth. And it's a great question. Sometimes we get a phone call from a synagogue far away and asks us, when can you send a team down here? That is unfortunately not something that we do, but we do offer training, multiple levels of it, and it is targeted for your congregation. And there's, I think, we do some special training before the high holidays for our existing teams of volunteers. And I think next week there's 10 synagogues who are coming live, 10 synagogues who've started to do some of our online training and are now ready to get trained in person in order to form teams around their synagogue. So if this is something that you're interested in, and like I said, there's multiple tiers of training that we provide, go to our website and send us a message, and we'll see what we can do for you. But obviously, just like CSI is organizing this and other things before the high holidays, we're doing the same for the institutions in our network. And the more training we can provide, the better, because ultimately it doesn't matter if one institution is targeted, all of us feel unsafe. So the more of us that have that additional layer of security, the better.
And Mitch, that's all we have for now.
I want to thank Nadine from UJA and Cheryl from JCRC, as well as Richard from CSS, as well as our entire CSI team, including Ethan Ehrlich, representing Rockland. And I want to wish all of you Lashana Tova, happy, healthy, and New Year. And we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you.